So we're going to toss it over to my co-diver, Sam Becker, who's going to talk to us about what the students have to say. So always looking to include student voice in Shaping EDU events and all of our projects. So we're very much looking forward to what our friends on the student panel have to say. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. And I just want to add my thanks to Catherine and Jason and KnowledgeWorks for, I think, really setting an important tone for the day. And I think that's actually a really great lead into our student panel. So for those of you who have been in the community a long time, and those of you who are just getting to know us, you may all be aware of our 5 calls to action. They are what our action teams and community are working on, these projects, and they have to do with ways in which we are going to be shaping the future of learning and society. And so it's so important when we're building solutions, when we're in our working sessions, to really be centered around what learner needs are. So in Shaping EDU events, one common denominator between all of them is we always have some sort of student panel or activity, in addition to students, participating alongside of us, because it's so important that we have dedicated time and space for student inclusion and to ensure that their voices are rising to the top. So we have 3 brilliant students, my goodness, with us today. I feel so very honored to be moderating this panel. And I will kick it over to them to briefly introduce themselves, where they're coming from, and what made them decide to join this panel, in terms of building and sharing their perspectives around shaping the future of learning. So we'll start with you, Faith.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Sam, for kicking us off. So as Sam mentioned, my name is Faith Dalzell. I am a graduate from ASU and a current employee of ASU. So I work with our team over at the Learning Enterprise. And I think that that's definitely a contribution to why I'm here today. We work heavily in the field of educational technology and what it looks like to provide equal and democratic access to education, as well as economic mobility. And so that's a field of work that I'm very passionate about, and that I think ASU and a lot of universities are doing a wonderful job of pursuing and pushing some boundaries. And so when we're exploring how technology interacts with that, I find it to be quite fascinating. And I will hand it off to Elizabeth.
Hi, like it says, my name is Elizabeth Carr, and thanks for allowing me to do this. I'm kind of excited about it. I am a previous graduate from Arizona State University. I got my major in nonprofit leadership and management, and I am now pursuing my master's of social work through the University of Kentucky. And I just feel like I've taken a pretty unique approach to my education throughout my life. So I kind of is excited to share my point of view and how my career goals and passions have changed because times have changed. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Faith. Last but not least, Ivan.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Johan Quintana. I'm still a student at Arizona State University. I'm graduating this May, studying criminal justice and as well as public service and public policy. I currently work as a student support specialist for TRIO at Mesa Community College. I was a transfer student, so I'm working at my old institution. And so I really have experience over the pandemic, just how important it is to have digital access for learning communities, because when the pandemic broke out, it was definitely something that shaped our program, and I think it shaped it for the better because we were resolving this crisis that was happening. But I think it allowed us to kind of ask ourselves, why haven't we've been doing this all along to be more inclusive and more accessible, specifically serving students from underrepresented backgrounds.
Thank you so much, Ivan, actually, for raising that. That's the perfect transition to the first Shaping EDU call to action and the first question that I have for you. So one of our action teams is working on designing the dynamic new now, and this is all about best practices, lessons learned from the pandemic. So I want to ask each of you, from when you first started to now, in what ways did you have to pivot, and what role did technology play? And we'll start with you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, of course. So my original plan was to I wanted to do corporate giving and corporate nonprofit, which led me to my degree at ASU. COVID hit and I decided that, fundraisers and giving had completely halted in the nonprofit environment. And so I decided to move back home to Washington State. And I then realized I lived about 2 hours north of Seattle. That if I wanted to continue doing corporate giving, I would have to either move or commute to Seattle, and that wasn't an option. I've also experienced, I did get a job at a nonprofit once I got here in Washington State, as most states, but we have a severe opioid problem. It is very much an issue here, and there is a huge need for social workers, case managers, and things like that, which is still in the realm of nonprofit giving. I'm just giving my time and energy differently. And so I then began to pursue my MSW. I was like, maybe I should try going back in person. Wasn't an option. I've done online college before. That's how I started with ASU. And so I pivoted, applied for my graduate's degree, got in, and now I am head over heels in love with everything involved with social work. Honestly, it's incredible. It was like the career that was made for me. So that is just really exciting. And I don't think I ever would have pivoted if it wasn't honestly for the pandemic. So I'm a rare case where I benefited from it. But, and it was really cool to see that how many other people took the opportunity to continue their education because it was COVID. They couldn't move farther in their careers. And I think it was a positive because not very many people would have taken that chance. And so it's cool to be a part of that group of people that were like, you know what, I'm going to do it because when in Rome. So yeah, it was pretty cool to pivot and then end up pivoting into my passion. So that was really cool. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. What about your experience, Faith?
Yeah, super interesting to hear from Elizabeth. My answer to this question is slightly different. So I have always taken a lot of my coursework online, but one part of the community at ASU that I was involved with was being a TA for a few classes. And I have to say that going from TAing a class in person to TAing online is quite a different experience. I'm fortunate enough that the professor I was TAing for really places that emphasis on building community and humanizing the learning experience, which is one of ShapingEDU's calls to action. And I think that can be a challenge when you're talking about how you're delivering that in a digital platform, and how are you making sure that those conversations are kind of naturally occurring, especially when you're in a course that is heavily based in conversation. And so looking at different methods that we can use technology to really play a role in. So I know that we used different platforms like Jamboards to kind of track different ideas and themes of what we were talking about, and providing that engagement component that you get a lot with whiteboarding sessions in person, but that can be hard to capture when you're discussing a digital platform. And so I think that it's really important to consider when you're looking at pivoting, that you're not trying to recreate the in-person experience online. You're trying to design a completely new experience. And I think that that's a very valuable mindset for professors or anyone who's interacting with students to really carry through their work and carry through whatever they're designing.
Thanks so much, Faith. And just to go full circle where we started the conversation with Ivan raising this point, love to hear from you.
Thanks, Samantha. So for me, working in the TRIO program, just to kind of let everyone know what we do, we are a federal grant program where we work with students that are first generation, they're low income or have a documented disability. And so we provide them support while they're in college. And that includes, financial aid, that will include, transfer services, tutoring. And so it was definitely, jumping into cold water when we had to switch all of our services from being in person to remote in less than a week. But one of the things that was very interesting is that our department was one of the ones that did it the fastest at our institution. And part of that was because, when we heard the news of the outbreak, we really were like, all right, we need to start looking into these things that we know a little bit about, like Google Meets and Zoom. And so we started testing them out. We started to do tutorials for the rest of our staff. And then one thing that we noticed was, amazingly, was that we were actually able to engage a lot more students than we used to when we were in person. And because of the population that we serve, we have students that, they have to, take the bus in order to come see us. We have students that, need to use paratransit. And so all of a sudden we could, meet with them and provide them services, in the comfort of wherever they were. It was definitely a challenge working with some of our student populations because they did not have access to the internet, or for some of our students, we have an American Indian Institute at Mesa Community College, so some of our students actually had to go back home to the tribal communities, so that presented a challenge. But at the same time, we figured out a way to make it work, even if it was just providing them services over the phone. When this all happened, I think that as we are kind of living in this new normal, our director and I think our team decided, let's just keep doing this. Like, there's really no reason why we should just go back to fully in person, because it makes things easier for our students, and I think just as staff, it also makes things a lot easier. So it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your personal experiences and perspectives. Also, I feel like this conversation is rolling along, because I feel like I know I heard Faith mention one of our calls to action, which is humanizing learning. And so when we think about humanizing and democratizing learning for our students' whole authentic selves, and I loved the example Elizabeth provided of actually like finding a new passion in the pandemic. Just switching gears a little, with digital credentials and the future of the workforce, how could digital credentials be more meaningful or useful to you in terms of how you're ramping up your own learning and your own careers? We'll start with you, Faith.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sam. So ironically, this is a very full circle moment. I had the opportunity about a year ago at the beginning of the pandemic to present with ShapingEDU on the idea of stackable credentials and what that looks like. And my current work at the Learning Enterprise actually ties into this concept. And so I think it's very valuable to have this ability to learn anywhere and any time. This is something that I think will continually be a focus and an emphasis area for students now that there is that flexibility. I don't think many students are as eager to jump back into having super strict pathways on how they have to learn. And I think that we also need to understand that students and learners are a very broad title and can really apply to anyone at any stage in their life. And so when we're talking about credentials and we're talking about digitalizing this pathway, having the ability to come and go as you please, as well as having your learning validated, is super valuable. And I think there's a lot of different ways we can do that. There's obviously badges, there's certifications, there's associate's degrees, and then there's other programs that are starting to build off bachelor's and master's that are following this pathway. And so they're really relevant because they allow you to customize your learning experience based on where you're at right now. And you're getting professionally recognized certification about what's going on. And I think as a student, having that name and being able to say, I got this from an institution like ASU is super valuable because it doesn't really make it smaller in any way than having your bachelor's. Instead, you're saying, these are the courses that I'm completing. Here's what I'm working towards. But in the meantime, I really want to be able to use the knowledge that I already have to get started in my career. And as a student who's always been very career focused, I think that that was definitely an emphasis area for me. And I think that there's a lot of benefit in understanding how this can appeal to non-traditional learners as well. There's a lot of benefits in having the flexibility to come and go. Not everyone's willing or ready to make the decision of what you want to be when you're 18 and you're coming into college and you're picking out what path you have to follow. There's also this idea that these credentials can really help the idea of lifelong learning, which is something that the Learning Enterprise centers a lot of their mission around. And so having this articulation of learned skills and also having the ability to meet the demand of adult learners is something that I see really blowing up. And it's something that I'm very passionate about and can't wait to see what the future looks like. So while having the opportunity to design them and play around with them myself, I'm interested to hear what my other panelists have to say on this.
Thank you, Faith. Elizabeth, I'm going to kick it over to you next because I know, you started talking about how location was a challenge, and how do digital credentials play into that?
Oh my gosh, digital credentials have changed my life. They're awesome. Education, certification, For me, continuing education credits, I need to like keep my licenses up and stuff, have allowed me, well, one, the pandemic has made it all online, which I've been able to take so many because while I'm doing case management or in my work, I can have that class in that forum playing on my computer, which has been awesome because not only that, but education isn't one shoe fits all. I was a student that had to work full time while I went to college. I paid for my own education. And so being able to have the flexibility of beginning my bachelor's degree through a major institution online and then transferring into in-person was amazing. And then when the pandemic hit, I was able to continue my classes via ASU Sync in Washington State. So the flexibility was huge. And I look forward to more and more organizations continuing to do that, which I can see with more institutions and education, even in the high school setting as well, which I think is awesome to give students more flexibility. Not everybody learns the same. Some people have more than one responsibility than just going to college or just going to high school. And so seeing that digital credentials, whether it's your high school diploma or your master's degree, can be completed online and can be completed at somewhat your own pace, so that you don't have to choose between your life and your responsibilities and bettering your future for yourself. And so seeing that happen in real time and actually being a part of it and getting to talk about it is just awesome. And I'm excited to see ASU was one of the first completely online colleges for like a state university. So to start to be a part of that and to see it grow and to see other type of educational and digital credentials coming out from it is super cool. And to be a product of it as well has been awesome. And I cannot speak more highly about digital credentials because it has changed my life, because it's given me more opportunities than I thought would. And like I said, education is not a one size fits all. Like it needs to be malleable to fit with each person, and it gives people more opportunities to achieve that. And so this is something I think is really cool. So I'm excited that this is being pushed. So thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. I just had a great flashback of myself as a Girl Scout, getting a new badge to put on my sash and feeling like I had earned a new skill and I was ready to show it off. So there's something to be said also to like the emotional connection that you make while learning, and then really being able to demonstrate that with something that feels, tangible. So
Also,
what about you? Yeah. What about you, Yvonne? Any examples?
Yeah, I think to build off Faith and Elizabeth's point about, the creativity involved in digital credentials, I think that's what really resonated with me because, sure, I think we've already had credentials, when it came to like iOS, app design or accounting or learning some type of program or software. But what was interesting for me was that, there's this nonprofit organization called College to Congress, and, their mission is to actually get underrepresented students interning in Congress, because it wasn't until a couple of years ago that there is actually funding earmarked to pay interns. There used to be just unpaid internships. And so when the pandemic happened, they weren't having any in-person interns in DC. So I actually took their course called College to Congress Use, and it was this digital credential that you could even add. Thank you for finding that. Yeah, that you could add to your LinkedIn, and it was this course designed to help you, work on your resume and understand how to land like an internship in DC. And so I'm actually, practicing what I learned in that course during the pandemic. And so I did apply to an internship in DC, and I actually, made the second round of applicants. So, it's interesting to see like, okay, there is this need for our information knowledge to still be available to the public. Why don't we shift it and make it into a digital course? So I think that's something that really impressed me about digital credentials, was just the creativity of the content and the curriculum that you can design.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and all of our panelists for sharing. Time is flying and we are moving right along. So yesterday we heard from Lara and Maddie and others around our Serious Play Institute. There's an action team working with Maya and Emery on immersive experiences in XR. And one thing that is really exciting about XR, and I really love this point, Faith, you made about not replicating in-person experiences and using technology to just do that. XR just opens up all kinds of new possibilities. So in a really dreamy question, I want to ask each of you, if anything was possible, what would learning look like for you? I'm going to work backwards, and we'll start with you, Yvonne.
I think if learning, in my dreamland of learning, I think that it would allow students to take hand or take control of their learning experience, and I think that's what XR is able to do. I definitely believe that students benefit from having a culturally relevant curriculum, and I think when you have XR, you can allow students from all over the world, regardless of where they live, to have access to this experience that they would not otherwise have. And so when I think one of my first XR experiences was probably at the Odyssey Aquarium here in Scottsdale a couple of years ago, when I got to be swimming with sharks, right? But I thought to myself, if I was a young kid and I was in grade school and I had access to this technology, I definitely would have probably been more engaged in a lot of my classes, right? When people are describing to me events that took place in history or describing one of the biomes of Earth, right, and how it looks like, if I could have just been able to see and have this glimpse, I think when you're a kid you already have a great imagination, but if you paired it up with XR technology, imagine where your mind could go. And so I think that's something that I'm excited to see if a lot of institutions and a lot of schools make this as part of their curriculum for their students.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing what the future brings too. And luckily we have a bunch of futurists with it who are shaping it. Faith, what about you? What would the utopian learning experience be for you?
Yeah, happy to answer this question. It's something that I find to be really exciting, especially as ASU and Learning Enterprise both work with Dreamscape to really implement this in ASU classrooms and potentially scale beyond. So for me, I've always been a very self-driven learner, and I really like learning at my own pace, and it's something that I find valuable. So going back to the point that was just made about ownership over your learning, I think that that's exceptionally valuable, and I think that's what a lot of technology-enabled learning is really moving towards. So you have digital credentials, which are allowing you more ownership than a traditional transcript in some cases, I would argue. And then you're having experiences in immersive VR worlds. And I think that that allows for a lot more ownership as well, because you're really exploring on your own time, at your own pace. You're making decisions, you're seeing the ramifications of those decisions, and you're kind of moving forward based on those experiences. And so for me, I don't get so excited about what this would look like for myself necessarily, but what this is going to look like for our future learners. When you think about the scaling and the application beyond traditional higher education boundaries, there's so much there. And I think that having this interactive level and this immersive experience is also something that really will foster a love of learning that will hopefully be lifelong. And so when we're talking about lifelong learning and having the ability to add these credentials in, I think that experiences like this allow you to explore a lot more. You're not stuck in the traditional idea of, oh, well, I hate science classes because I just can't do the lab portion. Well, what if your lab looks completely different? I know our Bio 101 currently is testing out the Dreamscape capabilities in that capacity. And so they use something called the Alien Zoo, and it's super interesting and something that I would have loved to see as a Bio 101 student. But it's the idea that education isn't going to have as many constraints as they have had previously when you're designing these experiences and when you're living out these experiences. And I think that's exciting, not just for the students, but also for everyone who's designing those experiences, thinking about what you missed out on as a student, what you would like to see represented, and how that's going to impact our future students and their learning journey.
Yes, thank you, Faith. And I appreciate you bringing up the Alien Zoo because being able to experience concepts like around you, like you're in them, is a whole nother experience. I'm lucky I've gotten to do the Dreamscape experience at ASU. Just took me back to when I was clumsily breaking beakers in my actual science lab and getting points deducted for that. Can't break any beakers in an alien zoo. in an XR experience. Elizabeth, last but not least, what are your thoughts?
I think it's fantastic. As I think, honestly, for the incoming generations that are just completely immersed in the digital age, I think it's going to be great. Like bringing XR to kids who only want to play video games is actually, I think they're going to get more out of, like, for example, like Faith and Samantha said, in science class, being able to do a science experiment in a zoo is going to be way more beneficial than reading a textbook from 1996. Like, and especially, and then from a personal standpoint as well, because I know I'm not the only one out there. I grew up having fairly severe dyslexia. So math and reading and literature, as much as I love to read, it was a struggle. It was hard. And having the opportunity to either use XR or even the simplicity of like making it a podcast, an audiobook, I think that would be wonderful. And then that way more kids create that confidence, either whether it's in lower education or higher education, that they're able to get the same experience as someone else who has no problem reading the textbook or has no problem doing the science experiment. This way, there's different avenues for everyone to get the same education, just with a different opportunity depending on what fits their needs. And so I'm very excited to see where the digitalness of fostering play and immersive experience goes in education. And I think we kind of got a taste of that with COVID. Like I had a couple friends that were in nursing school, and there were the jokes of who wants a nurse that learned online. Well, essentially they had digital labs, they had digital doctor's office that they were working in to practice their skills. And I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think it's great. And that allows them to gain more, I think, more perspective on different ways to approach it, because there's not the nervousness of working directly with a patient or with anybody in your career. And so I think it's a great, and especially with the next generations coming in that are, like I said, so immersed in the digital age, I think it'll be a huge benefit. And I think more and more people will be, and younger people will be interested in getting more education because it's more accessible to them and it's fun.
Well, thank you for bringing accessibility into it too. Just bringing new worlds that people without means couldn't experience otherwise. You know, not everyone can see the ruins of Pompeii or, you know, zoos around the world. So I'm just going to check in right now with Stephanie and see how we're doing on time, if we have time for one question or if time has just flown because we're having so much fun.
Absolutely. Let's ask a question.
All right, excellent. Good. Then we can move on to our next call to action. Now that you've painted us this future of learning that, quite frankly, I would love to be immersed in, let's talk a little bit about some of the outcomes and some of the really important things along the way to inform pivots and changes. And that's really all about data-driven and evidence-based learning futures, which is one of our calls to action. So when we think about data, what kinds of data would be helpful to you in your own learning and career journey? I see data as a way to become more self-aware, and self-awareness leads to greater comfort, greater passion. So when we think about data, talk to me a little bit about your feelings on how it's helped you or could help you in your own journey. Over to you, Faith.
Thank you so much for that, Sam. I am really excited and passionate about this topic, but I'll try to keep my answers short, being mindful of the time that we have with our audience. For me, I think that the data portion of it goes back to this idea of having a lot of ownership over your learning career and your learning journey. And so when you're considering that, you know, what does it look like for students to manage this digital portfolio that they're eventually going to have that has all these different credentials and these different skill sets? And how do you present that in kind of a wrapped up resume format? But that's something new. And I don't think that we have that yet. And I think it's something that we're working towards building. And I think it's going to be super important. But I think that the idea of using data to empower not just our learners, but also those who are designing and teaching these courses is very important, because you're able to track different success rates in courses, monitor engagement, and really create a learning map of sorts. So you can see what resonates with the students, what doesn't resonate with the students, and get a better idea of what teaching to the learner looks like. And I'm a very big, passionate person about teaching to the learner. I don't think that we're just supposed to teach our students. I think that we're supposed to understand where their skills and interests align with the concepts that we're putting in our classrooms and that we're trying to share with them. And I think that that's hopefully going to become a bigger version of teaching and learning as we move forward, especially when you're considering we're kind of at this idea where we've had mass-produced education for a long time and there's a lot out there, but now we're stepping into what would it look like to add that personalization to it. And that's something that I think has a lot of flexibility and fluidity as we move forward. I think that there's so many different routes that we can take. And I think that's very valuable for us to continue to explore the different routes and understand that those routes are going to change as we add new layers of technology into our classrooms. And so I think that conversations like this are exceptionally important and should always be happening and be engaged. So Sam, I've said it once, but I'll say it again. Thank you for having the student voice at ShapingEDU. I think it's a very valuable experience for everyone that's involved.
Well, thank you. And we could always learn more and we can always do better with inclusion. It's not a final destination, right? It's a continual journey. And I'm happy to have all y'all alongside us on it. Yvonne, I would love to hear from you and your perspective on, how data and what kinds of data could help you in your journey.
Yeah. For me, what I think about is on how we can use data. It really centers on keeping the learners as human. So, it is important to keep in mind that with as much of the benefits and flexibilities that online learning and digital learning provides for communities, there are also students that, whether they're in grade school or whether they're in college, that, they have to be in an unsafe environment. They don't have services like counseling services. So for me, I would like to see data on how we can use digital learning to bridge a lot of the gaps that the communities are facing. So for example, in Arizona, we constantly hear that there is a lack of college counselors, or that there's 500 students sometimes to one college counselor at a high school. Well, how can we use digital tools to gain access, right? That we don't necessarily have to have our students speak to a counselor here in Arizona, but from anywhere in the world, or ideally maybe the United States. But we hear that we don't have counselors at schools, right? And one of the things that we saw in the pandemic was that counseling could still be effective if it was provided online. So my data focuses on how you're not only just focused on education success, but human success, because I think we know that a lot of the things that happen outside the classroom is what it really influences a learner's life and their trajectory.
Oh, that's such a great note to end on about how so much learning really happens outside of walls. I think I've actually heard Ruben Puentedora has a really good phrasing for that, or about habitual learning. So maybe if he's here, I'll ask him to type more about that into the chat. But above all else, I just want to thank you three so much for taking the time to share your insights, your experiences, and being so vulnerable and honest and open with us. Some of our community may have questions for you, so I encourage you, if you have availability, to stay on and type in the chat, and even leverage Slack just in case. But thank you so much, Elizabeth, Faith, and Yvonne, for, I think, really setting a wonderful tone for our working sessions today. Really appreciate you having you here. Let's all give a big virtual round of applause to our amazing student panelists. All right, back over to you, Steph.
All right, thank you so much, Sam, and thank you to the students for participating today. Amazing insights there, and I think all of the teams would agree that your voice has been heard and will be factored in to the projects, and we really appreciate it.